out and let you guys go.
We are going. All right. So, folks, this is KMMU Main Street Media, Utah. I am so grateful to be here with you today. And I have David up live because some things didn't come together quite like we wanted to. I said, David, I'm going to take you off screen, then I'm going to bring you on screen, and blah, blah, blah. And then when I hit the go live button, it didn't go live, and it said, I don't know what was going on. So I don't know if it's a me thing. I have
John, you
no
you
idea.
know, even our guys like Tim Pool have these technical issues. Okay, even the big guys have these tech issues. Good to see you,
Even the
David.
big
I'm gonna
guys.
bow out. You're good to go.
Okay, all right. So, and Dwayne, if you want to put down the just kind of the normal stuff you do down in the private chat, that'd be awesome. So, this is Main Street Media Utah, right here on KMMU.org. Looking forward to being with you for roughly the next hour and 40 minutes. I've got David Pyne joining me. We might go just a few minutes after 6 o'clock. So, typically Mondays and not Mondays and Tuesdays. Boy, old habits die hard. Typically Tuesdays from 4 to 6. I do a show right here on Main Street Media Utah, and David Pyne is going to be joining me virtually on a monthly basis. We'll get to that in just a minute. But first, I want to do my normal show intro, and I want to just start out the show with the show prayer and the show mantra. No need to bow your head, close your eyes. It's just the prayer of my heart when it comes to doing this show. I hope my show is a gift back to my forefathers, the founding fathers, and may it be an acceptable token to our Father above. Then the show mantra. Where there is liberty, there is the Spirit of Christ. Where the Spirit of Christ is, there will be liberty. And the greater the Spirit of Christ, the greater liberty will be. Now, before I get to David Pyne, I do want to mention this real quickly. I'm going to ask the audience if you wouldn't mind just saying, when you're saying your prayers, remember Michael lets in them. Michael is fine as far as physically. His mother passed away at the beginning of the week, and it's a little bit she had Alzheimer's. I hope he doesn't mind me saying that. So, I think the family had been saying it was time for her to. He told me it was time for her to go, but she went sooner than they expected. They thought she was going to make it till the end of the month, and she didn't. She passed away Monday. So the time and briefness of how quickly it came was unexpected, but they were expecting her passing. But so if you as the audience would say a prayer for her. His wonderful mother leaves behind a few children besides Michael, grandchildren. I can't remember if there's great grandchildren in the picture or not. And also, her husband is still with us. He's doing well. His health, he's in good health, good condition. But as these things happen, I've had family members where a few family members that have had Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or some form of dementia. And while you're praying for him to leave, when that moment and that phone call comes, it's still difficult, and it's much more difficult than you anticipate it's going to be. So the prayer in my heart is, Michael, may you and your family have a little bit of the Spirit of the Lord to be with you. So, Michael, thank you for joining me last week, and know that my prayers and my thoughts of my family and our show are with you. So now, David Pyne, thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate you being here. Let me introduce a little bit of David Pyne's background to the audience, those of you that aren't aware of David, because he's been a regular guest, and I will get to how often, kind of frequently, we think he'll be joining us. But David T. Pyne, Esquire, is a former U.S. Army Combat Arms and Headquarters Staff Officer who was in charge of armaments cooperation with the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas from 2000 to 2003, with an MA in with a master's in national security studies from Georgetown University. He currently serves as the president of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security and as a member of the Committee on the present danger of China. He recently served as defense and foreign policy advisor to former Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. He also co-authored the best-selling book Catastrophe Now: America's Last Chance to Avoid an EMP Disaster, and his new book, Restoring Strategic Defense, will be published in December of 2020 of this year. He serves as the editor of the Real War newsletter at dpyne.substack.com and previously served as contributor to the National Interest. To find more information about him, just go to dpyne, and that's dpyne.substack.com, and you can go there and just find out a little bit more about him. And boy, my phone is blowing up on me now. It hasn't hardly rung all day long, but it's going off now. So, David, thank you for joining me. Thank you for being here, and appreciate you being willing to join us. Now, real quickly, just a programming note for everybody. Typically, the third Tuesday of every month, David Pyne's going to join us, at least for an hour. But today, he extended me the courtesy of 2 hours because he's put out a lot of information recently, and there's a lot going on. Now, what I really like is, this is kind of something that, we're going to touch on a subject matter that some of you in the audience might be like, clutch your pearls almost. Going away from the narrative that you have heard. Now, if you've been in the freedom movement, if you've been willing to look at, quote unquote, what they call conspiracy theories, this is not necessarily going to be all new information to you. I think some of it will be new information to most of you, even that have done looking into it. But there's a lot of information out there that, bottom line is, I think there's a lot of good source material that's not too hard to find. But what I like what David has done is he's put it in a kind of a white paper, kind of just a nice bullet pointed, case by case, reason by reason why World War II wasn't exactly what we thought it was. And so I want to couch this, first of all, let me couch this off by saying the story of World War II as taught in the United States, in world history and U.S. history, and even Utah history, if you grew up in Utah, or whatever state it happens to be. Here in the state of Utah, in seventh grade, you get Utah history. In eighth grade, you get U.S. history. In ninth grade, you get world history, and it repeats as well when you get into high school. Bottom line is, would you agree with this synopsis? Maybe 1 minute synopsis. World War II was fought by the United States. We got into it begrudgingly, but because on December 7th, 1941, Japan did a sneak attack on Pearl Harbor on a Sunday morning, did a sneak attack, took down a bunch of ships, one of them being the Utah, USS Utah. In fact, there's a nice monument to it where you can go and see the U.S. Utah. And it was sneak attacked. Like General MacArthur was pulled out of the Philippines, I believe it was. And we decided, instead of going after and defending those we decided, let's join up with everybody else. Right after that attack, the United States declared war on Japan, and then Germany and everybody else on the evil side joined in and declared war against the United States. Everybody from Great Britain and the Soviet Union joined with the United States, and we all decided we're going to take care of Europe first and then go take care of our boys pretty much all by ourselves in the Pacific on our own. Funny how We always happen, we go to help the world and the world doesn't, oh, well, we'll leave that one alone. But the bottom line is, we went over to Europe. We gave the American might, and all of a sudden, basically from day one, when the United States joined the war, that war was done. Yeah, the power of the United States economy, its manufacturing base, and at that point, I think it was a foregone conclusion that the United States was going to wind up, the United States and quote unquote the Allies was going to win the war. I mean, basically, as soon as the U.S. came in, it changed everything. Yes, there were some lessons that had to be learned. They had to learn how to fight. They had to learn how to correlate. But the bottom line is, the access, all they wanted to do was sink the ships coming across the Pacific. And we made so many boats and we sent so much stuff, they couldn't sink them all. All right. So fast forward through the end of the war, the United States winds up winning. And then all of a sudden we have the split with the Soviet Union. Okay. In a nutshell, the good guys won, the bad guys lost, right? Hitler was the most evil individual in the history of the world. Don't look at all the millions and millions killed by Stalin. Don't look at Mao. Don't look at Pol Pot. Don't look at those guys, because Hitler was the most evil person in the history of the world. So I'm going to shut up and say, would you agree that in general, the synopsis that I've given about World War II and shortly after World War II, as it came to a close, would you agree kind of with my overall synopsis?
Well, first of all, thanks, John, for inviting me on your show to address this important topic. I've studied World War II for the past 44 years. I know I might not look that old, but I am. I've been studying it since I was in grade school, actually, and read hundreds and hundreds of books. I even did a research project where I was trying to write an alternate World War II history book, and that's where I came across a lot of these facts, which was about 20 years ago. I would agree. To answer your question, I would agree that that is the common mythology that, World War II was was the good war. It was good against evil. The Soviets were the good guys, even though they killed many times more innocents than Hitler had during his reign in power. And and we just liberated all of Europe. Liberated all of Europe. And then somehow the Soviets turned back. And then, the parts of Europe, which was 2/3 of Europe, that 64% to be exact, that they liberated, suddenly was enslaved. And just it was as much enslaved by totalitarianism as it was under Hitler. And so essentially, the truth about the war is that, we allied with the Soviets. We were junior partners to the Soviet Union. We gave them $11 billion in aid, which equates to over $200 billion in direct military assistance in today's dollars. That included 23,000 tanks and armored vehicles between the U.S. and Great Britain, of course, with the U.S. providing the lion's share. About 15,000 combat aircraft and half a million jeeps and trucks to help the Soviets conquer, again, nearly 2/3 of continental Europe, as well as nearly all of East Asia, including, most importantly, mainland China, Korea, and Southeast Asia, where we fought, two big wars. We lost 100,000 troops. But so I wrote this article. It's really a follow-on to a number of articles I've written previously. This happens to be my favorite subject, by the way, and it's hard to get people, podcasters like yourself, interested in discussing military history, which is, that's again, one of my favorite topics. And the reason that I think this topic is so important is because, as this Tucker Carlson interview pointed out with Daryl Cooper, host of the Martyr Made podcast, this is kind of the founding myth of the neo-imperialist, New World Order, essentially, the rules-based international order, the liberal international order that Biden keeps saying that we're fighting to defend, in Ukraine, and that it's It's not, it's democracy versus autocracy, even though he's bringing a Putin-style autocracy to the U.S. with all of the political persecutions he's doing, and supporting a real, bloodthirsty autocratic regime in the person of Volodymyr Zelensky. But returning to World War II, one of the chief myths of World War II is what I call the myth of Munich, and the myth of Munich says that World War II was started because Neville Chamberlain, signed the Munich Pact, which restored, 3.5 million Germans to Germany. They had voted to be united with Germany following the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the end of World War I in 1918, while they were part of German Austria, and we gave them self-determination to join Germany. And that was considered an act of, horrific appeasement. We should never appease dictators, supposedly, and that's supposedly it's never been done again. So that was, that's the biggest myth, is that the war started from appeasement. In fact, it's the exact opposite. The war started because the British unwisely chose to end their policy of appeasement of Nazi Germany. And of course, we all despise Hitler as one of the greatest, most evil mass murdering monsters of all time. I don't think that's where he would have ended up if we hadn't, if the British and Americans hadn't fought him. If we hadn't fought this unnecessary World War II. I don't think that he would have done that, but the fact is he was, and there's no one made him do it. No one made him kill 6 million Jews. We did kind of make him. We provoked a world war. At least when I say we, the British did, not we, but the Western Allies. Hitler was a man not of unlimited ambitions, as the liberal media or liberal establishment historians have suggested, but he was very focused on establishing an Eastern Empire for Germany in the East at Russia's and Ukraine's expense, and he didn't want war with Britain or France or even Poland, for that matter. He'd spent 5 years trying to court peace with Poland, and essentially, he wasn't even demanding one single inch of Polish territory. That's what was so interesting. Of all the reasons to start a war, probably the best reason to have started a war against Hitler would have been his decision to occupy the Czech lands of Bohemia and Moravia in March 1939, because that was the first time that Hitler had ever made a move, of aggression against a non-German people. Previously he reoccupied the Rhineland. That was always German. Everyone agreed with that. Then he had the Anschluss with Austria, which Austria voted for in November 1918. That was very representative of the will of the Austrian people. And then, of course, the Sudetenland was part of Austria as well, or had been. Wanted to reunify with Germany, but then that he foolishly decided to violate the Munich Pact, and that was kind of the turning point with Chamberlain. Chamberlain, of course, was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, and he had kind of staked his honor that Hitler would keep his word, and he was committed to peace. Certainly, it was very true that Hitler was committed to peace with Britain and France, and he wanted peace with Poland as well, and of course the U.S. But Hitler was not a man of his word. He made a foolish decision. He was an Austrian. He wasn't really a German. He was born in Austria, and it was ethnically German, but he was an Austrian essentially, and had served. He did serve in the German army, but he grew up in Austria, and so that was. His first priority essentially was to unite the Germanic peoples of Austria with Germany, and that was. That was a legitimate goal. Self-determination. It was something that President Woodrow Wilson and the U.S. at large had long supported. So that was very reasonable. The Munich Pact, I think, was the right decision, and it did avoid World War II. It postponed it for a year, and it could have postponed it for good if Chamberlain had been visionary enough to, accommodate Hitler with regards to the German city of Danzig. Danzig essentially was the trigger point for the outbreak of World War II. And what happened was, after Hitler stupidly occupied the Czech lands of Bohemia and Moravia in March 1939, it was about 6 months later that he actually, he'd already offered to Poland in I think it was September, November of 1938, that all he wanted to have a lasting peace and a 25-year military alliance with Poland was that Danzig would continue to be a free city, but it would be a free city under German, not Polish administration. And that was just kind of the token that he wanted to, for a lasting peace between Germany and Poland. People forget that most of the German lands lost at the end of World War I were annexed by Poland. And so, he had far greater, if he had really wanted war with Poland, he would have just simply said, give us back all the territory you stole from us in 1918, and then we'll have peace. But instead, he didn't ask for a single inch of Polish territory, just Danzig. And the Poles briefly considered returning it. But of course, and Hitler even offered to allow, Poland to annex Lithuania, and kind of reestablish the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. But the Poles wouldn't agree to that. So in exchange for the return of the Polish quarter. So the Polish quarter was a territory that, we essentially, the Allies at the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 had broken up Germany into two pieces, where the most traditional Prussian lands, the kind of the capital lands of Germany, had been broken in half, and so there was East Prussia.
So did you say the Prussia lands?
Yeah, so East Prussia had been amputated from the remainder of Germany. And there's no great power in the world that would have acquiesced in that continuing. I mean, if it was the U.S. and we, Canada annexed part of eastern U.S. That cut our country in two all the way to the Mississippi, or rather the Gulf of Mexico, would be our top national priority to restore those territories to our country. So. I guess what I'm saying is, Germany had a just cause to fight World War II to restore those lands, despite the fact that, again, Hitler was an evil mass murdering monster. He wasn't yet in 1939, but he became that by 1942. And of course, the Poles had a just cause of self-defense to defend what they deemed their territories, which they had taken, but then had subsequently been ratified as part of Poland as part of the peace agreement that was forced on Germany at the point of invasion at the end of World War I. So, essentially, when the British guaranteed, Poland from a German attack at a time, in March 1939, at a time that Hitler had never contemplated attacking Poland, and was still trying to peacefully negotiate the return of the German city of Danzig. But then, of course, it came to, the British allied with Poland, and Hitler signed the Hitler-Stalin Pact, which divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, in the belief that, Britain and France wouldn't dare declare war on Germany, knowing that it would be a one-front war. Essentially, Poland would fall very quickly to the Germans, which everyone understood would happen. Of course, they did anyway. But, Hitler's first peace out of 16 German peace offers between September of 1939 and May 1941, the first one was the day after he invaded. Mussolini had proposed an armistice where, essentially the lines would be frozen, that there would be a ceasefire, and the parties would discuss Germany's claims to Danzig and the Polish quarter to be returned peacefully, without further need for war. And Hitler decided to conditionally accept that, offering to withdraw all German troops from all of Poland except for the Polish quarter, which was 4.3% of Polish territory at the time. This is a territory the size of Montenegro, so it's a very tiny territory as territories go in
Okay.
in
There
Europe.
are some of us that may not understand how big Montenegro is. So, roughly, what size does that correlate to in the United States?
It's about 5,000 square miles. So 5,000 square miles. It's I think it's the second smallest country in all of Europe. I mean, if you don't count the Vatican, I guess the Vatican is smaller.
Right.
And the principalities like,
But boy, it
Andorra.
sure is powerful.
Well, it's a member of NATO, but yeah, it doesn't offer anything. I think it's got like 500,000, inhabitants or something like that. So, this was part of the old German province of West Prussia, and it was, it was again a very capital territory for the Germans. Critical, and Hitler didn't ask for all. He only asked for 1/3 of the territories that Poland had annexed from Germany under the terms of this armistice proposal. And sadly, I think Chamberlain was thinking about it, but then Churchill basically, told him to veto it. And, of course, that meant a declaration of war. So that's kind of the story for how, the short story for how World War II broke out. And this Darrell Cooper, World War II historian that Tucker Carlson interviewed, essentially exposed a lot of these facts, that we allied with the Soviets, that the Soviets, were evil, that they imposed, communism. We had every reason to know that they would enslave Central and Eastern Europe, and that World War II was avoidable. And we could have, World War II in Europe cost the lives of 34 million Europeans, and 6 million of those were Jews. And, if we hadn't, the British and the French hadn't converted a regional German-Polish war that would have lasted no more than 5 weeks into a world war that lasted 6 years, my educated belief, and I can back it up, is that the Holocaust never would have occurred. Hitler had been trying to. He actually initially didn't want to deport. Or didn't want to forcibly deport the Jews from Europe. He was pursuing a kind of what I call Romney-esque policy of self-deportation for the Jews. And of course, again, he was evil. It was an evil policy, but he basically, tried to starve the Jews of jobs in Germany to get them to self-deport. And it worked, for I think half the Jewish population in Germany, left Germany voluntarily. And then, of course, once the war began, he started his, changed his policy to want to force deportation. And the British blockade was what prevented that. So he was trying to negotiate peace with Britain, and he offered very generous terms. In July 1940, he offered to withdraw all German troops from Western Europe and Northern Europe, including France, of course, as well as Belgium, Holland, Denmark, and Norway, in exchange for British neutrality. And, he would only keep Alsace-Lorraine, which was 2.2% of French territory, and then Luxembourg, which was I guess a little bit tinier country than even Montenegro. Those are pretty good terms. And then in May 1941, he sent Deputy Führer, German Führer Rudolf Hess, to personally hand deliver a formal peace offer to the British government that was far more generous still, in which, the Germans would withdraw all their troops from 81 to 83% of German occupied Europe, essentially having Germany revert to its October 1939 borders, and liberate not only those countries that I mentioned previously, but also Greece and Yugoslavia, and then withdraw all German troops from Libya and Egypt as well. So that was a very extensive peace deal. I think, and Hitler was the reason Hitler offered this, of course, was because he never wanted any Western European territory in the first place. He never wanted to war with Britain or France. He wanted, his exclusive goal once he finished the reunification of Germany, which of course was the Polish quarter and Danzig. He wanted to fight to lead a coalition of allied countries in a war against the Soviet Union to try to at minimum push the Soviets back from the center of Eastern Europe back to its almost the eastern frontier of Europe, which was the Ural Mountains. His objective was the Archangel Volga Astrakhan line, which was even east of Moscow. And what he wanted to do, of course, was to essentially make Western Russia and Ukraine kind of living space or Lebensraum for the German people, essentially having a colonial empire, but not having it to be overseas, where he knew the British could easily block the empire and steal all Germany's colonies, as Britain and France did at the end of World War One.
Okay, so would the Soviets have gone for that though?
No, of course not. It's what's really interesting is with this foolish guarantee of Poland, Chamberlain, who I really actually admire in many ways. He was really a champion of peace up to that point. And he only stumbled into World War II reluctantly. Germany started the war with Poland, but it was Britain and the British and French declarations of war that made it a world war. But then, Hitler had basically a political alliance with the Soviets. He signed a treaty of friendship in September of 1939 towards the end of the Polish campaign. And that essentially, made, Germany and Russia allies in all but name in the Soviets. So, for a period of time from September 1939, November 1940, Hitler actually gave up his plans to invade the Soviet Union. That was really the crux, other than, of course, deporting the Jews from Europe and reuniting Germany. That was one of his top three goals, after which he would be, essentially satisfied and would end all his military conflicts. But of course, Stalin wasn't going to allow that. He wasn't going to allow Germany to invade and annex, Western Russia and Ukraine. Although he did have multiple peace offers to Hitler beginning in July 1941 that would have done exactly that, which is, not to the extent, of course, that Hitler wanted, but he offered to allow Germany to keep the Baltics and Ukraine in July 1941 as part of a peace offer. Then in May 1942, he threw in Belarus, and those were really, peace offers. I think that Hitler was a fool not to accept the second offer in May 1942, when it was kind of, by that point, the U.S. was at war with Germany, and Hitler, knew that, Germany would be defeated, or at best, it would be a kind of a stalemate. And so, one of my previous articles was entitled "Missed Opportunities," the secret diplomatic history of World War II, that just reveals a lot of the peace offers that very few Americans are aware of. That even so-called World War II experts are largely ignorant of a lot of these peace offers that I'm discussing. Most importantly, the Hess peace offer. I mean, the Hess peace offer was the most, potentially history-changing of all, because, that peace offer would have been on the table and FDR was aware of it. FDR was aware that Hitler had offered to withdraw German troops from 81% of German-occupied territory, because Churchill had shared the offer with him. He shared the terms of the offer with him, knowing that FDR was on his side and would cooperate to cover up the terms. But thankfully, we can thank the American Mercury newspaper, a small to medium-sized newspaper, which in 1943 released, pretty much all the terms. And one of the terms was that all of the Jews would be deported, forcibly deported to British Palestine. It was so it'd be out of German control. Up to 6 million European Jews, and basically that's what the Zionists wanted. A lot of people, talk about the Zionists in kind of conspiratorial terms. I've never subscribed to that. I have no problem with Zionism, except to the extent that it hurts the Palestinians, and justifies the mass murder and starvation and terror bombings of Palestinians, as we see Israel doing today. But wouldn't it have been wonderful if the population of Israel was 4 times larger? That's essentially what it would have. It would have been several times larger if Hitler had had his way and Churchill had accepted this peace offer. So would have greatly benefited the Jews. It would have saved.
Why do you think he didn't accept that offer of letting the Jews out of Germany and to populate Palestine? Why do you think he didn't allow that? Why did Churchill stop that?
So Churchill was really a lover of war, and he, from kind of World War I on, he viewed Germany as Britain's main rival, and he wanted to wipe out Germany. He wanted to destroy Germany. Not as much at the end of World War I, but certainly by the late 1930s, he wanted to, he wanted to essentially do what Biden said he wanted to do Russia, which is knock Russia out of the ranks of the great powers. And of course, the Versailles Treaty did that. The Versailles Treaty made Germany, kind of a minor power because it basically completely disarmed Germany so that it was powerless to defend against invasion, even by minor countries such as, Belgium, which infamously joined France in invading the Ruhr and crashing the German economy to the point where, it was 4 trillion marks to the dollar, essentially. And you had to take wheelbarrows of cash to buy a loaf of bread. So that's Churchill, of course, supported the Morgenthau Plan, which infamously wanted to sought to kill up to 50 million Germans and transform Germany from industrial power to an agrarian state that could only support about 20 million people. That was genocide on a level that we haven't seen. We haven't seen in history actually ever. Although the Morgenthau Plan actually was implemented by for a time by the U.S. and Britain in Western Germany, which caused the deaths of at least 6 million, perhaps as many as 14 million German civilians.
Well, I want to come back to you. Mentioned something earlier. So Hitler, you thought, was fairly peaceable in 1939. By 1942, that had changed. Why do you think he changed? Or I may not be quoting you perfectly, but what's the change between 1939 and 1942?
So I didn't mean to imply that Hitler was peaceful. What I was trying to say is that his desires for war were limited to Russia, the Soviets.
Okay.
The Soviet Union was the only country he wanted war with. He was willing to go to war to retake the Sudetenland in 1938. So the Munich Pact avoided a war with between Britain, France, and Germany over Czechoslovakia. And obviously, he was willing to go to war with Poland to retake Danzig and the Polish corridor and essentially reunify Germany. He was. I would say he was peaceful. What I'm trying to emphasize is that he wanted peace with Britain and France, and ideally with Poland as well. And of course, he wanted peace with the U.S. And he only declared war on the U.S. because FDR had, this is a whole other side, that probably we don't have time to explore, but, FDR had a plan from October 1940 to, of course, Pearl Harbor to provoke the Japanese to attack us.
He made statements. So I think we should touch on it real quickly. FDR made statements, I'll do anything. I can't remember where it was quoted at, but FDR made statements basically, I'll do anything to get the United States into World War II.
Well, that's exactly right. I think it was beginning of March 1941 that he started the Atlantic War with Germany over their sinkings of British ships, British merchant ships, bringing in weapons and ammo from the United States to Britain, and also foodstuffs and various other supplies. But essentially, he committed to Churchill that he would, if he would order U.S. destroyers if they saw a German U-boat to sink them, and then he'd deal with the ramifications later. Basically, he was daring Hitler to declare war on the U.S. Because he knew that the U.S. following the horrific results of World War I, which led to the rise, not only of Hitler but also this communism in the Soviet Union, because it was 3 days after the U.S. declared war on Germany that the Kaiser was finally, realized that their only hope to win the war or have a just and fair peace for Germany was to send Lenin with 30 million Deutschmarks to try to get rid of the Russian, get rid of the Tsar, overthrow the Tsar, and provoke a civil war in Russia. And that was successful, but it never would have occurred. He never would have allowed Lenin to go on a train with 30 million Deutschmarks to Russia from Switzerland had the U.S. not declared war on Germany. So there's basically all the horrible threats we face today can be traced back to the outcomes of World War I and World War II. So while those were military victories for the U.S. And the Allies, we were on the winning side. Our terrible choices, with the vindictive pieces of World War I and II, and of course Churchill's massive appeasement at Yalta, where he cravenly surrendered half of Europe to the Soviets when we didn't have to. Essentially, we could have fought to liberate those territories, or we could have accepted the offer, Hitler's offer for number one in 1941 to vacate Western, Northern, and Southern Europe, or we could have accepted the German resistance offer in 1943 to hand over Hitler dead or alive with top Nazi leaders and surrender to Germany to the West in exchange for permanent deployments of U.S. troops in Eastern Europe to protect Europe from falling to Soviet enslavement. So there were a lot of opportunities, which again most so-called World War II experts are unaware of, that really change our understanding of World War II. And one of the best books ever written, I think the best World War II history book ever written is a book called Stalin's War, that was written by Professor John McMeekin. And anyone who wants to be an expert, instant expert in World War II, read that book that talks about how it was Stalin that kind of manipulated events to get Germany and the Western Allies to fight each other, so the Soviets could mop up and conquer most of Europe.
Can I mention your kind of the headlines that you have throughout this article? So real quickly, let me remind the audience, David put together a piece on his Substack, and the heading of it is "Why Tucker Carlson is Right About the Second World War." And so I just want to go over some of these headlines, and then David, you can dig down into it just a little bit more. But these are kind of like the headlines for paragraphs. So one of these, or for several paragraphs. So one of the sections is the headline for it is "The Founding Myth of the U.S. Foreign Policy of Liberal Hegemony." Well, that still plays out today, doesn't it? Then the next one is "Stalin was the chief culprit of the war and killed more Soviet citizens than Hitler." Next headline for the next section was Churchill actually the chief villain of World War II? Boy, there's a lot of people that have issue with that. I guarantee you, here in the United States. Um, then the next headline for the next section is Hitler's peace offers rejected by Churchill. You've already mentioned mentioned a number of those so far. Then the next one is Churchill's war crimes. Boy, there might be a few people that have some issues with that. Um, and then Stalin was the real chief culprit of World War II. That's the next headline. And then I think this is the last one, the last kind of headline for the next section: the British Empire versus America's liberal empire today. So that's interesting. The British Empire versus America's liberal empire today. I want to hit real quickly. So here's a piece of historical fact. Is it the Western? I forget what it was called, what the fleet was called back in the time of World War II. But was it called the Western Fleet or the Pacific Fleet? But the I can't remember if the orders came directly from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, but all of our aircraft carriers were told to go to sea the morning of the attack. Just happened to not be in Pearl Harbor Bay. In fact, who was I want to say it was Air Force general that had predicted the attack of Pearl Harbor. He knew that it would be on a Sunday morning. In Japan, there is a harbor that is very similar to Pearl Harbor that they actually had been practicing these runs at. Boy, my college military what's the name of it's not General MacArthur, but there's a famous in fact, I think he was the first person that was responsible for having a plane take off the deck of a ship.
Yeah. You're thinking of Brigadier General Billy Mitchell.
Yes, Mitchell. Mitchell was the one, and he predicted this. But Franklin Delano, I want to say it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt himself, but he told the fleet, the Pacific Fleet at harbor, send those aircraft carriers out to sea, and that pretty much sealed Japan's fate when they didn't sink those. In fact, it probably was sealed before, but that was what FDR was willing to do. FDR knew that this could be coming, and he didn't give no warning was passed along to the Pacific Fleet. Hey, this is coming your way. Look out, folks. So that is a couple things that I want to point out. My question to you is, I don't know if you want to touch very briefly on the British Empire v. America's liberal empire today. I don't know if you want to touch on that real quickly, but obviously, I want people to go to dpyne.substack.com to find out more and read more about this. But that is something that may be interesting.
Yeah. So, one of the reasons I wrote this article is because there's so many corollaries between, World War II and Hitler, and Putin, and the one that's most obvious is actually not the case. Obviously, Putin is not a Hitler. Hitler succeeded in expanding Germany's territory by over 8 times, 800%, whereas Putin's expanded Russia's territory by less than 1% during a 25-year reign as Russian president. But in terms of the British Empire, so the British Empire was essentially, they were basically the superpower, kind of the U.S. of their time, kind of previous to World War II. And they, kind of had their own international order. It was, much less formal than the America's liberal so-called rules-based international order that we have today. but they had the biggest fleet. They had the biggest fleet. They had the biggest merchant fleet. At one point, they had the largest, industrial might. By 1914, they'd fall into third place. It was in 1914 that Germany, Imperial Germany, became the second largest economy and manufacturing industrial power. And then, of course, in 1937, Nazi Germany repeated the same success by becoming the second largest. And it's interesting that, Britain went to war against Germany twice, each time, right after it became the second largest industrial manufacturing power. Not saying that there was any kind of conspiracy on the British side, but I think that was a consideration. They wanted to restore British predominance as the second largest economic and industrial power behind the U.S., and that was part of their one of the factors that made them decide to go to war with Germany each time. But essentially, the British, the unknowns, or the little known secret about Britain is that British policy from 1925 to 1939 was to restore Danzig and the Polish corridor to Germany by peace. So they were hoping, beginning in 1925, they were hoping that to pressure Poland to return those territories to Germany, because for the very reason they knew that it could start a Second World War. They didn't want that to occur. But they decided, in the end, Chamberlain decided to go to war with them because, essentially Germany rejected the British, international order, and decided that if he couldn't get the Poles to give it back peacefully, he would take those territories back by force. So that to me is very similar to what we saw with Putin. In the case of Hitler. Hitler offered to withdraw from all but 4% of Polish territory in exchange for peace. And with regards to Putin, he offered to withdraw from all pre-war Ukrainian territory in exchange for peace, which would have amounted to 93% of Ukrainian territory, keeping, of course, Crimea and the Donbass republics at that point were only 3% of Ukraine's internationally recognized territory. But again, the U.S., the U.S. wouldn't have, just like Britain in 1939, we had this absolutist mentality that, no compromise, no appeasement. We're gonna classify Putin as a new Hitler. If we appease Putin in any way, it'll just embolden him to invade other countries. And then if he's successful, then China will invade Taiwan, and all this ridiculous nonsense that has no historical logic or applicability at all. As President Nixon wisely stated, he wrote a book called The Real War. And I liked the book so much that I read in 1985 that Reagan supposedly used as the blueprint for his successful strategy of defeating the Soviet Empire, that I decided to name my Substack after his book, The Real War. And essentially what he stated in the book is that it was important that the U.S. accommodate Russia and China in recognition of their vital interests in order to ensure peace, and that any accommodations should be reciprocal. So if we conceded something, they would have to concede something to us in return. And that's the whole basis. That's how the British Empire the British were able to build up their empire over a period of centuries to be the greatest empire in world history, really, with controlling 26.5% of the world's territory, and about the same percentage of the population, is through these kind of reciprocal agreements, negotiated agreements with other great powers to avoid unnecessary great power wars. And the U.S. has forgotten. We've forgotten all the lessons of history, and we've drawn all the wrong lessons from World War II history. As I said, the myth of Munich, that it was appeasement of Germany over their just claims to the Sudetenland that caused the outbreak of World War II, and it was the exact opposite. And any non-partial historian would see this and would be able to concede that the fact that it was the British decision not to appease Hitler, but rather to confront Hitler directly with a formal military alliance from April 1st, 1939 onward with Poland, which was then led by a military junta, essentially, of a clique of colonels. So it wasn't a democracy. The British historically had no national security interest in Eastern Europe whatsoever. And so it was a complete departure from previous British policy, which again was based on, accommodating Germany to, kind of reunite Germany peacefully, so they wouldn't be tempted to start a war to reunite Germany by force, which is, of course, what happened. And so it was entirely predictable what occurred. But, we see all these mistakes of history with this absolutist refusal to even talk to Russia more than 10 minutes over the last 3 years to discuss an end to the war in Ukraine, which is just unforgivable. And it's caused the deaths or wounding of a million Ukrainian soldiers, whereas Russia's lost 100,000 dead and maybe 200,000 wounded.
Forgive me for interrupting you. I don't care how many lives it's cost. In a way, please be clear. In a way, I don't care. The bottom line is, let's say there wasn't one life that's been lost. The fact that Biden is not willing to talk to Putin for more than, if you're going to list the names of world leaders you need to talk to and who's the most important ones, and let's just say, okay, Xi Jinping has got the second largest country, but he's much more powerful than India is. So let's go. It's Xi Jinping. Maybe it's India. And you can even arrange these a little bit. Well, I sure like dealing with the, he and Justin Trudeau have got to be best buddies, right? And let's say that Castro is another one of his best buddies. But on that top 10 list, just because of the amount of nukes that Russia has, the size of the landmass, and the population, it's got to be in the top 10 or top 20. If it's in the top 10 or top 20, that's a world leader. Frankly, you should be having conversations with every other month, if not monthly. You're telling me you can't break off a phone call for 30 minutes? I mean, if I was a world leader, you got to be talking to those other world leaders on a somewhat regular basis, or at least attempting to call. The statement of Putin should be, hey, Biden reaches out to me on a regular basis, or Biden reaches out to me on a regular basis, and I just don't want to talk to him because he's a jerk. I don't care. But the fact that they've only talked for about 4 minutes in the last 3 years, right? That's insane.
And no, they haven't talked at all. Yeah, Biden hasn't taken a call from Putin since December 7th, 2021. So it's been 3 years as of a couple of weeks ago that they've even spoken on the phone. Here we are on the verge of World War III. It's a Cuban Missile Crisis on steroids, except it's in Ukraine, not in Cuba. And we're the ones doing the threatening, not the Soviets or the Russians. If they did the same thing to us, if they overthrew a democratically elected prime minister of Canada and replaced him with a Russian puppet leader, and then deployed 1,000 troops to Canada, armed them with missiles, short range and long range missiles, and then started bombarding U.S. cities, including Washington D.C. How would we react to that? That's the problem, is we have no strategic empathy for Russia. So if we put ourselves in their shoes, we would be doing far more than Putin has been doing. It wouldn't just be a limited invasion of Canada. We would be trying to, we'd be bombing the crap out of them. We'd be invading all the territories.
It literally would be either Governor Trudeau or it'd be the 51st. I don't know that we would actually. I think we make it a territory. I don't think we make it the 51st state. It's a little too liberal for me, so we don't make it the 51st state. But it becomes the territory of the United States.
The Commonwealth, yeah, the Canadian Commonwealth.
Yes,
just like
it becomes American Canada, similar to like American Samoa or American Tonga, right?
Right.
Okay. Last thing I want to hit. I don't know if you want to answer it now or if you want people to read, and if I'm going to ask, of all. Let's see, Stalin, Churchill, Hitler, FDR, And let me think. Mussolini. Who's the biggest who's the biggest evil culprit of all those individuals?
It's definitely Stalin. Yeah, Stalin, had the biggest death count by some counts, 51 million by the end of World War II. Hitler, of course, is widely understood to have 12 million people that he killed as in terms of civilians and POWs. He killed a couple million, Russian POWs. So that's included in the death count that he has. Of course, I guess, the argument against that would be, well, Hitler was only, Führer of Germany for 12 years, so he killed 1 million a year. So that's somewhat valid. But if Stalin killed 50 million during his 31-year reign, that's still a higher death rate. But it's and we allied with Stalin. The biggest myth is that it was good against evil. It was evil against evil, because we fought on the side of the biggest mass murderer against the second biggest mass murderer, and we can legitimately say we liberated 7 Western European countries from totalitarianism, from the Nazis that stayed free, but then we gave away the rest essentially to the Soviets. And, how is that a victory for freedom? How is that a victory for democracy? We just traded one evil, mass murdering dictator, a genocidal dictator for another. And that's the same thing with the Japanese. The Japanese controlled, northern and eastern China. And, so China was partially enslaved by the Japanese. And then we basically gave the whole thing to the Soviets, with Truman's decision to cut off all military assistance to the nationalist Chinese freedom fighters in 1946. And that
Shanghai
never
Czech, right?
What's that?
Was it Shanghai Czech?
Yeah, it was Chiang Kai-shek. So the fall of China to the communists never would have happened if we hadn't allied with the Soviets in World War II and armed them to the teeth to help them enslave and subjugate all of Central and Eastern Europe and East Asia. So we created, Hitler, Churchill and FDR and Truman. Well, really, Churchill and FDR were the authors of the Cold War. They created the Cold War. If were for them, worst case, we would be fighting the Cold War far to the east in Eastern Europe, and China would be an ally against the Soviets.
That's something you've talked about a bunch. How do we go about, dare I say, cultivating a relationship with either Russia or China more to kind of play them off against one another? Because historically, they've not exactly been best bosom buddies like they are right now.
Yeah, that's right. So, in the words of Vivek Ramaswamy, we want to do a reverse Nixon. I personally think that Nixon's decision to go to China was his worst foreign policy mistake by, thinking that he could peel China off from its alliance with the Soviets. That was never going to happen. I mean, two communist regimes, granted they have differences, but they're never going to side with the U.S. against the other. That was just never going to happen. And of course, the outcome of that is that we built communist China into the greatest enemy that trillions in U.S. trade surplus dollars and really subsidies, U.S. taxpayer subsidies can buy. And they now have a larger nuclear arsenal than we do, and everything else. But it's really Russia. Russia is the key, not China, to neutralize the Sino-Russian alliance, because Russia doesn't really, they only pose a threat to us because we've made them a threat. We've made them an enemy. Putin's, he was elected president of Russia in 2000 on a platform of peace with the West. He wanted to integrate Russia into the economic and security infrastructure of Europe. He wanted Russia as a member of NATO. He mentioned during his interview with Tucker Carlson, I think it was February 4th of this year, that he had offered to Bush in 2002 that told him that could Russia join NATO, and actually he said that to Clinton in 2000. And then I was also aware of time in 2002. He essentially said the same thing to Bush, and they both said no. So how different would history be if we'd accepted Russia into the NATO alliance? They never would have invaded Ukraine. They never would have invaded Georgia. They wouldn't be our enemy today. They'd be our ally against China. But so they're never going to be our ally against China. But if we were to forge this new Russo-American entente, kind of along the lines of Britain and France before World War I, then we kind of have the semi-alliance. We'd be strategic partners. We could essentially get them to, not really be a true military ally with China anymore. Because, if we went to war with China over Taiwan, then if we had really good relations with them on an entente basis, there was no chance that they would go to war with us, with China. They wouldn't join China in a war against us. So that's really, I published that proposal. I think it was in August. I've tried to get it sent to the, Trump administration or the Trump transition team. I'm not sure if I've been successful, but that's really the roadmap. If President-elect Trump is really serious about ending the war in Ukraine in 24 hours, my plan is the best hope of him accomplishing that.
I wonder who would want to keep the United States from partnering up with Russia and having really good trade relations.
Well, it's the neocons and neoliberals, the same folks. Sometimes they're referred to as the primicists. They're the folks that believe that the U.S. is the global hegemon. I don't think we ever were, but certainly we're not today. We don't have dominance economically. We don't have dominance industrially. Our military is weaker than it's ever been vis-a-vis our enemies. I would argue in our history since at least the War of 1812. So we're a superpower, but we're a superpower.
Ben Shapiro says that we're the strongest. We're the strongest military in world history right now.
And Shapiro is a historical, and a strategic ignoramus. Ben Shapiro, a lot. I find a lot to agree with him on, but when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, I mean, he's dead wrong across the board. He's just buying all the Biden disinformation bubble Kool-Aid.
Okay. Well, any last thoughts you want to hit before we kind of change over? Any last thoughts on your article that you want to touch base on, and then we can. There are a couple topics that I want to hit with you.
Yeah, no, I just want to encourage all of your viewers to please check out my article on my Real War Substack at dpyne.substack.com, and give it a read. Try to read a lot of the links that I post to substantiate my points. And I mean, basically what I'm saying is, it sounds like revisionist history, but it's really the true history. It's the myths, the liberal history of the war, the Soviet apologist history of the war, that really is the revisionist history that most people believe and accept. So I'm trying to revise history back to the true actual history. And Churchill again was the greatest appeaser, along with FDR and Truman in modern history, and yet they hold up Churchill as some great opponent of appeasement. No one loved appeasement more than Churchill did, as long as he was appeasing communism. And that's why the liberals think of World War II as a good war, because in their heart of hearts they are very sympathetic to the communist cause, and that's why we face potential defeat in a war with communist China, because we have these same type of liberals controlling America, with Biden and Kamala Harris and all the rest, Pelosi and Schumer, that really don't view China as a threat. They view China as almost a democratic ally, like a financier, or in the case of the Biden administration, to kind of a corrupt source of tens of millions of dollars for his family wealth. So we're up against a lot of problems. The very dangerous world that Biden and the primicists, or the neocons, have created for us, that have actually made it less. I hate to say it, but it's I think Trump's chances of being able to stave off World War III are less than 50% under the circumstances that Biden and the neocons have handed off to him.
Less than 50%?
It could be less than 50%, probably a 50-50 chance.
Let's hope that it's it's the 50 that doesn't go the wrong way. Okay, let me ask you this. Let's say that we knew President Trump was going to be elected just because the numbers were outstanding, but we're at the point we are now, but we've got another 6 months to a year before Trump could be put in office. So let's say that we're at the point we are right now, but it's actually 2023, not 2024, and we're a year away from. But we have the numbers are what they were. Kamala Harris has no chance of getting in. Donald Trump's numbers are in the 50s as far as. What would you put the numbers at then?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a matter of time so much. I guess the biggest threat for me is communist China. I think that they're likelier than not to blockade Taiwan before Trump takes office. And I think Trump has surrounded himself with some really bad neocon advisors that, the statements that I've seen being made by him and his transition team about Syria, about the Russia-Ukraine war, have been very, very discouraging. Far from what he promised to bring peace, and stability, and to avoid World War III. In his latest statement, I enjoyed his remarks. His press conference was quite masterful, but I was really dismayed to hear him say, I think peace with Russia and Ukraine is going to be really hard to achieve. He promised to achieve it in 24 hours. And, if he used the peace plan along the lines that I proposed, any one of my peace plans, I have, probably 6 peace plans that I published in the last two to 3 years, he could achieve that peace in a week, and instead, he's appointed a guy by the name of General Keith Kellogg that is one of the worst. I mean, he's really one of the worst choices that he could have made. A neoconservative warmonger who's vociferously anti-Russian, pro-Ukrainian, not really, kind of an America last type of guy that really will be in a position to really sabotage Trump's peace attempts with Russia and Ukraine.
Well, let's get to a couple of your new articles. So I texted you. There was a couple things that I wanted to touch base with you on. And I'm glad you brought up the neocons, because you published an article about another thing on your. What would be the best way to put it? A piece on your Substack. Let's see. Let me kind of go in the order. So I said I wanted to touch base on the war in Syria. I want to touch base in the missile attack into Russia, and Donald Trump surrounding himself with the neocons. And you happen to have an article already about that. So those are kind of the 3 topics that I'd like to hit. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm an active poster on X. Anyone who wants to check out my X or Twitter account, it's America First Con, or at America First Con is my account. And I published a report card of Trump's appointees so far, and most of them I gave A's. I thought he's had excellent picks. But in terms of foreign policy and defense picks, he's done a really good job picking, Tulsi Gabbard, obviously, as the director of national intelligence, as well as Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. But when it comes to Secretary of State, Marco Rubio and then National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, those guys are, very, neocon America Last type folks. I mean, just recently they've decided to support peace in Ukraine reluctantly because they think we need to, kind of refocus against China. And I agree with that. But they're kind of proponents of the Kellogg peace plan. And Keith Kellogg, again, neocon, so there's a lot more. There's Stefanik, as UN ambassador. There's Huckabee as ambassador to Israel. There's Sebastian Gorka. He's very, very much a neocon, made some really stupid statements about Russia as well, that I think he's been appointed not deputy national security advisor, but somewhere in the National Security Council. And there's others. So there's other neocons that Trump has appointed. And I think they're going to serve him very poorly. It's really, Trump was tremendously, he's really amazing. He's really great. America First conservative all the way. Has all these great ideas, but then he, in his first term, he made the mistake of picking all the wrong people to advise him that got him to, not accomplish the things that he initially wanted to accomplish, and persuaded him from pursuing America First policies. And I think it's maybe not going to be quite as bad, because I think he has more America First conservatives in his cabinet than he had previously. But again, in these key areas, especially with Russia and Ukraine, and perhaps even with China, they could persuade him to present, demand unacceptable peace terms for Russia, even for a ceasefire that could prevent a ceasefire from ever being effectuated, to end the war in Ukraine. And I think the chances of a temporary ceasefire are good, but I think the chances of a peace agreement, permanent peace agreement, are near zero with the Kellogg peace plan, because there's so many parts of it that are unacceptable to Russia, especially NATO peacekeepers in Ukraine. I mean, can you imagine that? NATO's been fighting this proxy war against Russia for 3 years, and now Kellogg's coming out with a plan, which Trump has said he supports, to send tens of thousands of NATO peacekeepers to patrol a new demilitarized zone between Russia and Ukraine in southeast Ukraine. So that's if that's the ceasefire requirement, there won't be a ceasefire. There won't be an end to the fighting in Ukraine, and Putin will feel the need to either escalate, most likely to reinvade Kyiv Oblast, and just retake, knock Ukraine out of the war by taking the capital or partially surrounding the capital, as he was able to do within mere days after invading Ukraine 3 years ago. And then, with China, if as I expect, China blockades Taiwan in the next few weeks or months, I think it'd be better actually if they did that in the next week, 1 to 3 weeks. If they were to do that before Trump takes office, then Trump doesn't have a military option. He doesn't have the ability to he could threaten, of course, but he wouldn't control the military, so he couldn't start a war with them, which I don't think he would do. I think he's that's really his last. Of all the things that I believe that he believes, avoiding World War III is number one on the list. More than tariffs, more than immigration, deportation, all those things. I think he understands that our number one national security imperative as a nation is national survival, and you can't win or survive a war with Russia and China. It's a lose-lose proposition for the U.S. and our allies. So, I think there's a chance that he could be persuaded to. Well, I think that what I was trying to say is that I think that he would pick up the phone and try to call Xi and say, hey, let's convene a meeting. Let's have a online meeting or something like that, virtual meeting, and let's try to see if we can hammer out a peace deal to avoid an unnecessary world war with the U.S. and China. whereas if it was after he took office, he might be convinced to send a bunch of U.S. ships to the region, kind of look like we were going to challenge a blockade, and there could be kind of an accidental war where there's an exchange of fire, aircraft, ships sunk, aircraft downed. That could start a full-scale, World War III with China that would, cause them to cyber attack the U.S. on day one of, major combat operations with the U.S.
Do you think that Trump is being slow walked into bad positions? There's also, I've heard the converse of he's starting to put out these things that he knows she is not going to agree to. He's starting to put out positions that he knows Putin is going to agree to, because that's part of the a negotiation tactic of, hey, I know they're going to say no to this, so I can concede things that I never actually would intended on implementing in the first place.
Well, I think that's, there's certainly some sensibility to doing that with regards to Russia, where, he could throw that out there, the NATO peacekeepers, and then, meet with Putin the first day and say, okay, if you agree to give up your claims to the rest of, the Ukrainian oblasts of Kherson, Zaporizhia, and Donetsk, then I'll give up, the NATO peacekeeper idea, and I'll give up all the other, the other points that you don't like about the Kellogg peace proposal, which really it's not a peace proposal at all. It's a ceasefire. It's an armistice plan. Essentially, it's an armistice that's heavily weighted in favor of Ukraine and heavily weighted against Russia. So. I think that would certainly make sense. I would be very happy to learn, if that was the case. But the danger is you throw those things out there, and then Russia doesn't have an incentive to end the war. They don't have an incentive to accept a ceasefire, and it just really prolongs things unnecessarily. When if you had kind of a minimally acceptable peace proposal like I've outlined with Chet Nagel, who's a former Cuban Missile Crisis Navy pilot that flew over Cuba in 1962, and a former, I think, Reagan or CIA official, then you could accomplish it on day one, because I think, with the possible exception of the, my idea to make Ukraine a major non-NATO ally, the rest of it would be entirely acceptable to Putin. That would accomplish Trump's plan to end the war in, week one of his presidency, or, day one, as he stated, 24 hours. So yeah, those are my concerns.
Let's talk about the launching of the missile by Ukraine with the assistance of the United States into Russia. When you heard that had happened, what were your initial thoughts?
Well, I was alarmed because that was, a tremendous escalatory step that Putin had stated would signal, that the U.S. and NATO were direct participants in the war against Russia. As Putin has stated, essentially, those missiles can't be fired without targeting coordinates provided by the U.S. Or the West, because Ukraine doesn't have any of its own satellites. They can only fire missiles within about a 50-mile range on their own account. Any target information past 50 miles has to be provided, or coordinates need to be provided by the U.S., Britain, or France. So. And not only that, but there's actually, Putin has stated, and it's likely the case, that these missiles, are advanced and technically complex enough that Ukrainian military can't even fire the missiles. We may actually, have to essentially press the launch button, in terms of U.S. technicians. So if that's the case, can you imagine, Russian long-range missiles being fired from Canada, deep strikes in New York and Washington, D.C. and elsewhere in the Northeast, with Russian technicians pulling the trigger and recommending the targets. I mean, that's essentially what we're doing. And if it was the U.S., if it was the U.S. in this situation, again, the U.S. Any U.S. president, with the possible exception of Joe Biden, would be responding much more harshly than Putin has. So, as I listen to what Putin has, stated, granted the fact that he's a brutal dictator, who's likely killed off some of his political opponents. He is really quite a rational actor on the international stage. He's very cool-headed. He's not inclined to escalate more than is necessary. I mean, certainly Russia has escalation dominance across the board. As I've stated, on your previous shows, Russia has about 3 times more strategic nuclear weapons and 50 times more non-strategic nuclear weapons, according to Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. They have super EMP weapons we don't have. They have mobile missiles, mobile IBMs, ICBMs rather. They have the Oreshnik IRBM, which is much more technologically advanced than ours. And they have the ability to use those to destroy NATO headquarters and targets. So as they demonstrated with that, with that attack on the Dnipro aerospace weapons facility. So they threatened to fire those are standard equipped with nuclear warheads. The Oreshnik had 6 warheads, which were conventional, armed with submunitions that were like the rod of God that destroyed the target with kinetic force, Mach 10 impact. But Russia has a lot of nuclear weapons. And it only
so
take
those were just kinetic. So were they multiple entry vehicles or multiple entry warheads that were used, or were they individual missiles?
So they were mounted on a hypersonic glide vehicle, kind of an avant-garde. This is avant-garde, of course, being one of the 6 super weapons that Putin revealed in
so
in
if you would explain to us what that is, because I know there's people in my audience that are like, what is he even talking about?
Yeah, so hypersonic glide vehicle can be mounted atop Russian, ICBMs and IRBMs. We didn't realize it could be mounted on an IRBM, but obviously it can with the Oreshnik. Is a delivery system for hypersonic warheads that can, hit at really high velocities and do so quite accurately. So the Oreshnik had the hypersonic glide vehicle had 6 warheads, each one of which had, I think it was 4 to 6 submunitions. So it was able to hit with like 24 to 36 submunitions, and really devastate, penetrate deep underground. I think up to 3 floors deep in this hardened munitions.
Submunitions being able to go underneath the ground. They don't blow up right above the ground or on the ground, but they actually are designed to penetrate, correct?
Well, yes, except for the fact that in this case they didn't actually have any conventional explosives. They just it didn't start any fires because they didn't have explosives or explosions. It just did damage with kinetic force and kind of disintegrated the impact areas for the munitions factory that it hit. So this is a really advanced capability. But what if that had been armed with nuclear warheads? So they would have been able to hit 6 nuclear targets in Ukraine, and obviously they could do the same with NATO. And the Sarmat, is armed with either 24 avant-garde hypersonic glide vehicles, or it can be armed, which typically, by the way, only have 1 warhead. So that's a new technology in and of itself. Hypersonic glide vehicles are typically armed with only 1 nuclear warhead. So in this case, there were 6, presumably 6 conventional warheads, which presumably could have been 6 nuclear warheads. So that's like orders of magnitude more advanced technology than the U.S. has. The U.S. is armed. The U.S. nuclear arsenal consists of warheads and strategic delivery systems that are anywhere between 32 years old to as old as 63 years old. So the B-52s we fly, I mean, they were first deployed, I think, in around 1955, 1958.
Yeah, those things have been around for they were old when I was born.
That's right. Yeah, they were.
They were getting towards the quote unquote. They were getting towards their estimated time of, I forget what it's called, what they use, but we figure we're going to have these around for 20 years. It was getting around to that time frame when I was born in 1974.
Yeah, B-52 strategic bombers were obsolete when you were born.
Yeah.
Let alone today. I mean, they're dinosaurs. I mean, granted, they work, but they're very slow. They're subsonic. We don't even have them. I guess they have ALCMs on the strategic level, but they also have gravity bombs. So the idea of a B-52 that's not stealthy at all, penetrating massive, Russian missile defenses, and then dropping a gravity bomb, Hiroshima style, that's never going to happen. I mean, they just wouldn't be able to penetrate Russian airspace. They're nice, big, juicy targets that could be knocked out of the sky by Russian S-300s, 400s, and 500s.
Big, juicy targets is absolutely correct, and it is the absolute opposite of something stealthy. Those things are big, lumbering, loud, and don't turn very fast.
Right.
Yeah, they would be shot down soon. Basically, they'd be shot down right as they entered into Russian territory. They may be down even before then, but they'd be like, "See you later, pal."
Yeah, and that's just with the SAMs. Obviously, Russia has several hundred interceptors that they could use to shoot them down, including MiG-31s that have speeds in excess of Mach 3.
So, why does the United States even use those things anymore? I mean, I understand it if they're doing it in these small countries like Iran, maybe, and Iraq, and something like that. Hey, maybe we can get them there. But what is the purpose of even flying them anymore?
So that's a really great question. It's a question I've been asking for years. Strategic signaling is the best usage for strategic bombers. It's not, they would take 10 hours to deploy to, if you were to launch, for example, a B-52 or a B-2 bomber from the US, it could take up to 10 hours to reach the Russian targets. So that any nuclear war is going to be over in 30 minutes. Unless you forward deploy them, and then, perhaps they could enter the conflict to have some, at least attempt to make a difference. But really, it's the strategic signaling. So strategic signaling is where you kind of threaten nuclear use. And so, B-52s are, catch people's attention because they're typically are nuclear armed. We actually have, 64. I think we have 40 B-52s that are nuclear armed, and about 20 to 25 that are no longer nuclear capable. So under the New START treaty, we have a limit of essentially 65 nuclear capable bombers. 20 of those are B-2 Spirits, stealth bombers, and then I think the other 45 or so. 40 to 45 that we have are nuclear capable B-52s. But essentially, you send B-52s, for example, we sent them recently to fly over the Baltic region, which is kind of right near Russia. We've sent them near Ukraine, not into Ukraine airspace, of course, but I think in kind of Romania and Poland to, I guess, just kind of remind Russia that we're a nuclear power. I think we do the same thing in the Pacific. But aside from that, there's very little utility for nuclear bombers. And it's really interesting to me that, a lot of congressional Republicans that don't really understand nuclear warfare and nuclear usage, want to build like 100 B-21s. B-21 Raiders are the replacement for B-52s. They won't come online until the end of the decade. But there's, again, it's just a waste of money, in my opinion.
I was about to say, why do we even do these? It seems like just these nuclear missiles or some type of space-based weapon. That seems to be what's going to happen.
Exactly.
And then let me ask you this: Is China and Russia building any of these same type of weapons platforms? Because we know they're building missiles, a bunch of missiles.
Yeah, so Russia's just been using their Bears and their Blackjack and backfire nuclear bombers. They're not building any. I mean, they do have some that are under development. They have one strategic bomber that's under development, a supersonic bomber, but it's not. They're not really putting a lot of effort into it. China is. I think they're building kind of a stealth bomber as well, and that may come online pretty quickly. I think it's kind of modeling the B-2, of course. When it comes to aircraft,
I would say it's modeled directly on the B-2. They hope they can make a few improvements on it, but I guarantee you it's done exactly off of the B-2.
Just like their J-35 is modeled on our F-35. They don't even hide it. They actually assign the exact same, numerical designator, so that just to push in our face. They stole the blueprints from us and they reverse engineered, what they had. So.
Yeah. All right. I want to hit Syria real quickly. I want to dive into that a little bit. I look at Syria. Speaking of B-52, supposedly we had B-52 bomb a bunch of chemical plants. One of the questions was that our chemicals that were they bombing over in Syria using the B-52s to cover up what the United States have been involved in? Were they so there's on one side I have people that are saying the United States is using those B-52s to cover up our bad acting as far as the speaking of our, meaning the United States, bad acting that we've done over there. Also, then you could go to the other side. Well, the B-52s were just trying to take out chemical weapons factories. There's another side of this that the Israelis were, doing this so they could gain more power, territory, and control of the Middle East. And then another thought is Turkey is taking. It looks like Turkey is going to be taking a quote unquote a ton of land. And another portion is, well, Russia's actually pulling a bunch of puppet strings. And they got one of their puppets. They've got them there that is flown into their country to be given. So, what are your thoughts? Assad's now in Russia. So, what are your thoughts on what happened with Syria?
Well, I think Syria collapsed mainly because of the Trump economic blockade. After the alleged, Syrian chemical weapons usage, I think it was in 2017, Trump enacted broad-based, really crushing sanctions on Syria, and it basically took away their ability to pay their own soldiers. It was that, as well as the Kurdish control over the Syrian oil fields in the northeast part of the country, that deprived Assad the ability to have the funds to pay his troops a living wage. And so essentially, much like Germany, that was, they heard reports of their family members starving to death at the end of the war from the British blockade, that they just ended up, they would go on, leave, and they would never come back. And so that's essentially what happened to the Syrian army. They went on leave and never returned. They went AWOL, deserted. And the entire Syrian military collapsed, and this was, so that was really the two factors. It was the Trump sanctions plus the Kurdish control of the oil fields. But it's been really interesting to see how, the leaders of a country that fought a war on terror against Al Qaeda are now celebrating an Al Qaeda leader being installed in Syria. Al Qaeda's never been more powerful. Of course, they don't call themselves Al Qaeda anymore, but this guy was one of the first Al Qaeda members leaders in Iraq. He hails from Al Qaeda in Iraq. He hails, which later became ISIL. Islamic State. ISIS. So he's. It wasn't until I think it was 2016 or 17 that he began trying to rebrand himself. As no longer ISIS or Al Qaeda, even though he'd been ISIS or Al Qaeda.
I love that you use the term rebrand himself. I mean, it's like, and the reason why I'm chuckling is I'm like, boy, he's had a lot of good help of rebranding himself is a perfect way to put it. I mean, he's had a lot of help. It's kind of like somebody who, Goebbels might be proud of this guy, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this guy, not only is he ISIS and Al Qaeda, but he's, there's a lot of evidence that he was backed by the HTS terrorist organization, was secretly backed by the CIA. And it's against the law, of course, for the CIA to back terrorist groups. But they do see.
When has that ever stopped the CIA before?
Yeah, the CIA, acts against international law all the time, and with very little accountability. And they do regime change, all the things that we accuse Russia of doing. The CIA has been doing for decades, and Russia really hasn't done since the fall of the Soviet Union. But the CIA was a bad actor that helped him, overthrow Assad. I think that decision to overthrow Saddam was made by Obama, and it was continued by Biden. Trump was more ambivalent. I don't think he really, he wasn't really that focused on that. He did make some, bad moves in terms of, attacking Syria with massive missile strikes and whatnot, believing the chemical weapons usage, which I think is quite dubious. Not quite as dubious as the alleged Iraqi chemical weapons attack against the Kurds in '88, which, that there's more evidence still that was bogus. It was actually the Iranians that did it, based on studies of how the bodies, were dead bodies were affected. But this certainly, without a doubt, this was a defeat for Russia. It was a defeat for Iran. Iran, people talk about how Iran is now defamed. They're a nuclear power, most likely. So, and they still have Lebanon, Hezbollah, of course, in Lebanon. But now their supply lines to Hezbollah have been broken up. So Bush handed Iran control of Iraq, essentially, with the Iranian proxies. So they had a direct line, all the way to Israel, from Iran to Iraq to Syria to Lebanon. They had a direct line to easily, supply weapons all the way to Lebanon, to the Mediterranean coast. And now that's broken up. They still have control of Iraq, but they don't have control of Syria anymore. And they're not likely to have a lot of influence with the new HTS government, which is, kind of Turkish-backed. To a lesser extent, CIA-backed, and maybe even Israeli-backed. I think Israel, Israel's been blowing up the weapons depot, so I don't think they really back them, but that they use them as a tool to defeat Assad and, essentially isolate Hezbollah, which is, a big threat to Israel with like 150,000, missiles and rockets, which of course they invaded Lebanon, months ago. And of course, Israel still has what's left of Hamas as well. So Iran. And Iran is, so they've suffered big defeats. There's no question about that. And they didn't really respond to that much to Israeli missile strikes in Iran. So Israel's definitely, got to the upper hand in this war that they've been fighting against Iranian proxies and against Iran itself. But this isn't a victory for the U.S. A terrorist leader with a $10 million bounty on his head, that's not a victory for the U.S. as Biden, is kind of touting that, Syria's been liberated.
Right.
This is kind of the same idea as, Hitler being overthrown in a much more powerful and, existential threat type of enemy in the Soviet Union taking over the lands that Hitler occupied. It's not a victory. It's trading one evil, leader for another. And Assad I would argue, was definitely the lesser evil. I mean, Syria didn't threaten anyone. They were taking Israeli missile strikes and doing nothing back, and really weren't supporting, of course they supported the Hezbollah terrorists, so that was kind of their main sin, I guess. But other than that, I mean, they never attacked the U.S.
Well, folks, you are listening to KMMU Main Street Media Utah. We're live on X, YouTube, and Rumble, and our website, kmmu.org. We want to thank you for listening to myself talk with John and also David Pyne. So, David, we're pretty much out of time. We've come up on the 6 o'clock hour here on Mountain Time. Let's do just kind of your wrap up thoughts.
Yeah, well,
Syria, Russia. Wrapping up thoughts. What are your thoughts?
Just want to thank you for the opportunity to to discuss these important issues on your show, and it's folks like you, patriots like you, that help get out the truth, kind of penetrate the Biden, what I call the Biden regime disinformation bubble, where we're indoctrinated to believe certain things, whether it's pro-Israel or pro-Ukraine or whatever the case might be, anti-Russia, Russophobia. I do have a lot of hope with Trump. Not as much hope as I had when he first won, because of again, some of the statements that have been put out there by him and his appointees. But we should have a lot of hope. It's hope that I didn't have. When I thought that Biden was, that Harris was going to steal the election from Trump. I thought our country was doomed, and now we actually have real hope that Trump will bring needed change, that he'll bring peace and prosperity, that he'll avoid, help us avert World War III. I mean, his heart is in the right place. He does sincerely want peace with Russia and Ukraine, and with China, of course, as well. So I hope all of your viewers will pray that God, preserves our great country, and that Trump will be successful in all his attempts to forge peace in this war-ridden world that the Biden regime's created for us.
Well, David, I want to say thank you for joining us tonight. Appreciate you being here. We're looking forward to having you on the third Tuesday of every month, kind of the standard standing time that we're going to have you on. And so we look forward to hearing from you. We love that you're bringing a perspective here to us on Talk with John, and to this audience on Main Street Media Utah. So I'm just going to say thank you so much for joining us this evening. We look forward to having you the third Tuesday of January. And folks, you need to go to his Substack at dpyne.substack.com. And he's put out 3 articles since the last time I had him on. And let's, these are articles you're going to want to see, you're going to want to read. And it's well worth your time, and it's well worth your investment.
Thanks, John. Great to be on.
Thanks, my friend. Have a good one. All right, folks, this has been Talk with John. We're going to sign off, and have a good evening.